Hey guys, Mr. Backerberg here. In this video, we're going to look at graphing quadratic equations. So we're going to be looking at quadratic equations written out in this general form where we've got y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And when we're looking at our equations, these a, b, and c values are going to be represented with some numbers. And based on some of those numbers, there are some properties that our graphs or our parabolas are going to have. So first, let's talk about that a value. For your parabola, if that a value is a positive number, then that means that your parabola is going to open upward. So it's going to be kind of a U shape. But if that a value is a negative number, that flips your graph over so it opens downward so it looks more like an N shape. Now, along with flipping that parabola over, that a value can also make your graph wider or narrower depending on what it looks like. So if that a value is some number that's bigger than 1, then that's going to make your graph taller, or we can also think about it as making your graph narrower. But if your a value is a number that's less than 1, like a fraction or a decimal, then that's going to make your parabola graph shorter and also wider. Now, as we're looking at the graph of a parabola, we can identify the vertex by finding the highest or lowest point on the parabola. So in this case, the vertex would be right at the origin because that's the lowest point on the parabola. And we've also got this axis of symmetry, this line running down the middle of our parabola that splits the graph in half. But we can also find the vertex and the axis of symmetry if we have the equation for the quadratic function. So if we've got an equation that looks like y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where those a values, b values, and c values represent numbers, then we can find the axis of symmetry by taking x equals negative b, or the opposite of whatever the b value is, and dividing that by 2 times whatever the a value is. And we always want to write it as x equals that number because it's a vertical line. Vertical lines are always x equals some number. And then, once we know the axis of symmetry, we can also figure out what the vertex is. So the axis of symmetry and the x value for the vertex will always have the exact same number value. So whatever we get for that negative b over 2a, that's also going to be the x value for the vertex. But then we also need the y value for the vertex because the vertex is an actual point on the graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that x value that we just found and we're going to plug that back into our equation for the x's and then solve or simplify down to figure out what that y value is. So in this example, we're going to find the axis of symmetry and the vertex based on the equation. So we've got y equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to identify my a, my b, and my c value. So a is always the number that's in front of the x squared, and there is no number in front of x squared, so I want to remember that that means that there's a 1 in front. So the a value is 1. The b value is the number in front of the x with no power on it, so that's going to be a negative 2. And then the c value is the number on the end without any variable attached to it at all. So the c value is negative 3. Now, in order to find the axis of symmetry, we said that was x equals the opposite of b over 2 times the a value. So we're going to get x equals the opposite of the b value, which we just said was negative 2. And we're going to take that and divide that by 2 times the a value, which is 1. So if I look at the top of my fraction, the opposite of negative 2, well, that's positive 2. And on bottom, 2 times 1 is just 2. And then if I take 2 divided by 2, I get 1. So my axis of symmetry is the line x equals 1. Now I also want to find the vertex. And we said for the vertex, since it's a point, it's going to be an x value and a y value. The x value is always the same exact number as the x value for the axis of symmetry. So that's going to be 1. Now, in order to find the y value for the vertex, I want to take that 1 x value and plug it in for x in the equation, and then simplify down to figure out what my y value is. And I'm going to use my calculator to help me out with that. So in my equation, I'm plugging in that 1 for the x value. So the first thing we've got is that x value of 1 being squared minus 2 times that x value of 1, and then minus 3. So I type all that in, I hit enter, and I get negative 4 as my answer. So that means that the y value for the vertex is negative 4. So we've got an axis of symmetry at x equals 1, and the vertex is at the point 1, negative 4. Taking a look at this example, we've got the equation y equals 2x squared plus 12x minus 7. The first thing I want to do, just like I did in the last one, is I want to identify my a, my b, and my c. So a is the number in front of x squared, so that's 2. B is the number in front of the plane x, so that's 12. And c is the number on the end without any variable on it, so that's negative 7. To find the axis of symmetry, we're going to do that x equals the opposite of b over 2 times the a value. So we're going to take the opposite of the b value, which is 12, over 2 times the a value, which is 2. So on top, the opposite of 12 is negative 12, and on bottom, 2 times 2 is 4. And if I take negative 12 and divide it by 4, I get negative 3. So for my axis of symmetry, it's x equals negative 3. Then for the vertex, that x value is the same as the x value for the axis of symmetry. So the x value there is negative 3. Now in order to find the y value, I need to take that negative 3 and plug it back into the equation and simplify it down to get my answer for the y value. So in my calculator, I'm taking 2 times the x value of negative 3, but I have to square that, plus 12 times that x value of negative 3, and then I'm supposed to subtract 7 from all of that. I hit enter, and I get negative 25 as my answer. So the y value for the vertex is negative 25. So this graph would have its axis of symmetry at x equals negative 3, and then the vertex would be at the point negative 3, negative 25. So let's talk a little bit about graphing a parabola. Step number 1, what we want to do is we want to figure out where the axis of symmetry is, and we're going to draw it out on our graph. That's kind of the middle focus point for our parabola. Once we know where that axis of symmetry is, then we're going to figure out where the vertex is and plot that point out as well. So again, that's going to give us kind of a starting point for our parabola. But then what we want to do is come up with some other points that we can plot out on our graph. And we want to find a couple points to the left of the vertex, and we also want to find a couple points to the right of the vertex as well. So taking a look at this example, we've got the equation y equals x squared plus 4x minus 3. And the first thing that we want to do is figure out where the axis of symmetry is located. And we're going to use that x equals negative b over 2a thing like we've been doing. So in this case, we're going to do the opposite of the b value, and the b value is the number directly in front of the x, so that's 4 over 2 times the a value, and the a value is the number in front of the x squared. There's no number in front of there, so that means an implied 1. So the opposite of 4 is negative 4. On bottom, 2 times 1 is 2, so we get a value of negative 2 for the axis of symmetry. So x equals negative 2. So that means from the origin, go left 2, and along that x value of negative 2 is the midline, that axis of symmetry for my parabola. Now I'm going to start filling out my x and y chart. Since I know that this x value of negative 2 is kind of the middle value, that's also where the vertex is going to happen. So for my middle x value, I'm going to plug in that negative 2. So I'm going to go to my calculator. First thing I'm supposed to do is take that x value of negative 2 and square it, plus 4 times that x value of negative 2, and then minus 3. So I type all that in, and I get negative 7 as my y value. So that gives me the point negative 2, negative 7, meaning that I have to go left 2 spaces and then down 7. So that point right there is my vertex. Now I said I wanted a couple points to the left of the vertex and also a couple points to the right of the vertex. So I'm going to think about this -2. If I go left one space from -2, that would be -3. And if I go left one more space, that would be -4. So I'm going to plug in both of those values, starting with the -3. So I'm going to have to do -3 and square that, plus 4 times -3, but then subtract 3 from that, and I get -6. So at -3, I'm at -6. I'm going to plot that point out, and then I'm going to plug in the -4 next. So I'm supposed to do -4 squared plus 4 times -4, and then subtract 3 from all of that, and I get -3 as my answer. So left 4 spaces and down 3 spaces, I have that point right there. Now that's only half of my parabola. I also need a couple points to the right of the vertex as well. So if I go to the right one space from -2, that would be -1. And then if I go to the right one more space, that would be 0. So those are my last two x values that I'm going to plug in. So starting with the -1, we do -1 squared plus 4 times -1, and then subtract 3 from all of that, and I get -6 as my answer. So -1, -6, I'm going to plot that point out. And then for 0, I'm going to plug in 0. So we've got 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 3 from all of that, and I get -3. So at 0, I'm down at -3. So these 5 points give me that U-shaped parabola. So then I'm going to take those and connect those with my line for that parabola. Taking a look at this equation, we've got y equals 3x squared minus 6x plus 2. The first thing I want to find is the axis of symmetry, so it's x equals the opposite of the b value, which in this case is -6, over 2 times the a value, which in this case is 3. So the opposite of -6 is +6, and 2 times 3 is 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1, so the axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. So I go to the x value of 1, and that's where my midline is for that axis of symmetry. So that's the line that splits my parabola in half. Since I know that the axis of symmetry is at 1, that means that my vertex is also at the x value of 1. So that's the midpoint for my parabola. So I'm going to take that x value of 1 and plug it into the equation so that I can figure out what the y value is. So I have to do 3 times that x value of 1 squared minus 6 times that x value of 1, and then add 2 to that. So I get a y value of -1. So at 1, I'm down at -1 for my first point. I want a couple points left of 1. So if I go left one space, that's going to be 0. And if I go left one more space, that's going to be -1. So I'm going to plug in the 0 first. So I do 3 times that x value of 0, square it, minus 6 times 0, but then add 2 to that, and I get 2 as that answer. So at 0, I'm up at 2. I plot that point out. Then for my last x value on the left-hand side, I plug in -1. So 3 times -1 squared minus 6 times -1, but then add 2 to that, and I get 11 as that answer. Now my graph only goes up to 10, so if I'm trying to plot out 11, I'm just going to estimate here that 11 would be about right there. Now I also need a couple points to the right of 1, so directly to the right of 1 would be 2, so I'm going to plug in that x value. 3 times 2 squared minus 6 times 2 plus 2, and I get 2 as that answer. So at 2, I'm up at 2. And then to the right, one more space would be 3. So I'm going to plug in that value. 3 times 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 2. Again, I get 11. And I'll have to approximate here. So at 3, I'm up at about 11 right there. So then I want to take those 5 points and connect them to get my U shape for that parabola the best we can. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.